So, on this longest day, welcome to the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club's annual colloquium. Now, in previous years, many of you will know we've used the colloquium to have an in-depth look at one of Scott's novels, usually one celebrating its 200th anniversary since publication. This year, though, we're taking a different approach and we have a general theme of Scott and chivalry. This is also the first time that our colloquium has been held entirely online. So the format for today is that our three distinguished speakers, all members of our club, will be giving papers considering different aspects of Scott and chivalry. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments after each speaker and again in the round table at the end. I'm sure that you're all familiar with Zoom, and I thought I was, but the days of the pandemic are a few years ago now. So there are two ways in which you can use Zoom to ask a question. At the bottom of your screen, you can either type in your question or comment to the chat box, and also you can use the raise hand, which you'll find in the react box. So without more ado, let me briefly introduce our first speaker, well known to many of us, Ian Chisholm. So Ian is a long-standing member of the club and a member of our council. After a career with the Home Office, Ian is now a part-time tour guide here in Edinburgh, and he's a former president of the Edinburgh Burns Club. So I would now invite Ian to speak to us about the importance of fair play.
Right, thank you very much, Madeline. As David rightly said, I'm more of a sort of a canopies or a amuse-bouche before the two main speakers. Now, I was thought of doing this talk because of the publication of this book by my friend Jonathan Duke Evans by the OUP fairly recently, and it's called The History and Significance of Fair Play, an English tradition, question mark. I may say the book brings out English means British, as it does so often. I mean, Duke Evans argues that the concept of fair play is one of the most important aspects of the British national character. It was used, for example, as a pragmatic British response to the philosophical revolutionary liberty, fraternity, equality concepts. But one interesting aspect of the book is that Sir Walter Scott uses the concept of fair play quite a lot, more than anyone else really in his novels. And of course, this is now possible to work out because of the digital versions of the books, and you can therefore search for the references to fair play. And there are a lot, but just to give some statistical analysis on one or two examples, and many of these examples are what I'd call fair play Scottish proverbs. So Scott uses in Heart of Midlothian, for example, he uses the concept several times, and one reference is, "Time's about fair play, you'll ken now what hanging's good for." And again, in the same novel, Jeannie Deans says, "There may be good in him yet, thought Jeannie. I will try fair play with him." And just a reference to Ivanhoe, which I'm going to say a bit more about. "Well and yeomanly done," shouted the robbers. "Fair play and old England forever." So Ivanhoe is one of the great novels of the concept. And interestingly, Scott describes the rules for the tournament in Ivanhoe very much in a fair play context, about you can't thrust with the sword, you've got to strike, you can use a mace or a battle axe, but not a dagger, and If a knight is unhorsed, what happens, and what happens if other people come in? There's a whole list of rules for fair play. And in a way, the fair play tradition seems to have been focused in early modern Britain on the way in which men fought each other. Also in Ivanhoe, you can see the rules for the archery conference and the stave fighting involving Robin Hood. And you can, in a way, see how this concept evolved into the rules for organized sport. And of course, the development of rules for organized sport is very much a British thing. We developed them in the 18th and 19th century. So it's an important concept in British life. In Ivanhoe, Wilfred and the Black Knight represent the values of fairness and chivalry in a world dominated by cruelty. They bring a sense of fairness to the social, racial, and gender divisions of English society of the time. They show kindness to Isaac the Jew. They accept as friends the outlaws and the serfs. And of course, the heroines as well both exercise crucial choices to the novel's action. And Robin Hood also in the novel embodies the tradition of fair play, in keeping with the traditions in the early Robin Hood ballads. And as I mentioned, the archery and stave fights illustrate the concept. Scott's innovation, though, as regards Robin Hood, was to make him stand for the oppressed Anglo-Saxon against the Norman oppressor. None of the old Robin Hood ballads suggest this. But in 1785, Joseph Ritson published an edition of the ballads. And in his introduction, he suggested Robin Hood was an admirable figure fighting against the Norman oppressors. Ritson was a skilled historian, but somewhat erratic in his judgments. And more importantly, he was an enthusiastic supporter of the French Revolution, which arguably goes to explain his presentation of Robin Hood as a man of the people. But from our point of view, most surprisingly, Ritson, of course, was a friend of Scott. And in Ivanhoe, Scott develops Ritson's view of Robin Hood. And he wrote that 4 generations had not sufficed to blend the hostile blood of the Normans and Anglo-Saxons, or to unite by common language and mutual interest 2 hostile races, one of which still felt the elation of triumph, while the other groaned under all the consequences of defeat. Now, this is not regarded as very good history. Even at the time, contemporary English writers noted among freemen, English and Norman could no longer be distinguished, historians at the time. But nevertheless, his portrayal has become very much the default setting of Robin in all the subsequent treatments in films and TV or the like. It's arguable, I mean, Scott's views on the rules of chivalry don't really correspond to the historical reality of the 12th century, and that goes for his Crusader novels. And it's interesting, in the introduction to The Talisman, Scott writes, in response to a critic of his handling of the historical material, "My violation of the truth of history gave offense to Mr. Mills, the author of the History of Chivalry and the Crusades, who was not, it may be presumed, aware that romantic fiction naturally includes the power of invention, which is indeed one of the requisites of the art." Nevertheless, Scott's view of chivalry and the Crusades has become hugely influential, as is his view of Robin Hood. His portrayal in The Talisman of Muslims as sophisticated and civilized, while the Crusaders are brutes and barbarians, has become the established view in popular history and film. Most recently, Sir Ridley Scott's excellent film about the capture of Jerusalem by Saladin, A Kingdom of Heaven, was attacked by academics as unhistorical rubbish based on Sir Walter Scott's Talisman. Ridley Scott himself acknowledged the influence of Talisman on the film. So Scott's views on chivalry, particularly in Ivanhoe and the Crusader novels, have had huge implications, accurate or not as they may be. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed for that amuse-bouche, Ian.
Yes, yes.
And there's time now for any immediate questions or comments. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask of Ian, or that can be rounded up at the very end.
Hello?
Yes, I don't think we've anything in the
Sorry, I
chat.
think Ian Torrance has got his hand up.
Oh yes, sorry.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. That was extremely interesting. In which is the novel of Walter Scott set in France, which ends with a person pretending to be the herald. Does that ring any bells with you? And that was an offence against the rules of heraldry.
Is that Quentin Durward, is it?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. That's
yeah,
right.
Colloquium a couple of years ago, I remember, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Now, is that actually the novel in which Scott most discusses the rules of heraldry and the sacrosanct rule of the herald?
I must say I did look at it a couple of years ago, but I can't remember that aspect. But he did know. Yeah, the thing about Scott, that quote I get from the Talisman, when he deviates from the historical accuracy, the truth, he's doing it for good reasons because it suits his fictional purposes. So I think he was very well informed on these practices, but quite often, of course, as I made the point about the rules of chivalry were very much observed in the breach. You know, people would often claim the rules of chivalry, but when necessary, they were ignored. A good example is Henry V's slaughter of the French prisoners after the Battle of Agincourt.
Yeah. No, thank you.
We have Angelica, Madeline.
Hi there. As someone quite new to Scott, actually, I've noticed in many of his books lots of references to Shakespeare. I wonder on this issue if Scott had much knowledge about Chaucer and the Knight's Tale, which has such a lot of definitions of chivalry within that tale.
I'm not 100% certain, but of course, Scott immensely knowledgeable about literature, English literature, Shakespeare in particular, but also, I suspect, Chaucer. I mean, he was an expert on medieval literature, medieval on chivalry. The point I'm making, I suppose, is that it's not always, the theory and the practice are not always the same.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised at the moment.